Let's talk about Man United, Kieran. So obviously a lot's been in the news around the ownership. Them Jim Ratcliffe kind of coming in buying I think 25% or so. So if we can just kind of go back to the initial kind of when the Glazers first purchased Manchester United, just a lot was said about how it was kind of purchased with debt, how they didn't you know do very well for the club, into the fans weren't very pleased. So can you just kind of break that down in simple terms for someone in terms of how that acquisition went and why there was so much kind of angst around that?
Yep. Manchester United was a company that was traded on the stock exchange, but it did have some big shareholders. The Rock of Gibraltar guys, the two Irish investors, they owned a substantial amount. They had a fallout with Sir Alex Ferguson and so on. The Glazer family owned a couple of percent of Manchester United, and then they started to build up their shares, and they didn't have enough money to buy Manchester United itself. So therefore, they created what's referred to as a leverage buyout. And the way that a leverage buyout operates is that somebody bids to buy shares, and the way that they're going to pay for those shares is that they're going to get the company that they acquire to borrow money, which that money is then used to pay the existing shareholders. So in the case of the Glazer family, they borrowed around about £700 million to buy shares from other shareholders. Um, that was deemed to be by the markets as quite a risky acquisition at the time, so that was reflected in the interest rates.
Mm.
Manchester United have paid out £941 million on that £700 million loan, £941 million in interest since 2005. And Manchester, it's a very emotive issue for Manchester United fans. They would say, well, yeah, we'd rather that money was spent on improving facilities for fans, investing more in the squad, investing in training facilities, and so on. The Glazers just stick their fingers in the air, and the Glazers are also saying, "Oh, we've won the Premier League on 3 or 4 occasions since we acquired the club. We've won the Champions League. We won the League Cup last year. Yeah, what are you lot all moaning about?" Um, and it's been a fantastic deal for the Glazer family, because what they've now done is they probably bought shares for sort of 50 to 60 million pounds. They've been taking money out of the club in the form of dividends. They've sold shares on occasions and made hundreds of millions of pounds. And the position that they now have is that they've sold a quarter of their shares to Sir Jim Ratcliffe, subject to approval by the Premier League, and they will have trousered the thick end of £1 billion extra from that. So Jim Ratcliffe has, as well as buying 25% of the shares, has a contract which says, I'm in charge of the football side of the business. So it's like playing a very, very expensive version of Football Manager on your PC. He now gets to appoint the manager, to appoint the director of football, to buy and sell players, and so on. The Glazers are still, in theory, in charge of the commercial side of the business. But Sir Jim is, and Dave Brailsford, they've just recruited a new chief executive from Manchester City, which they are claiming is to be a big coup, and he's certainly a smart guy. It'll be intriguing going forwards. And Manchester United's a soap opera masquerading as a football club, so loads of column inches of attention and comment.
Yeah, and that deal, that the 25%, from what I was reading, is that kind of a large in terms of cost per share? Was it kind of over the $30 per share based on? What is it trading at? So $20 or something like that. So there's a big premium there in terms of the extra value.
Yes, yeah. So he certainly paid an awful lot of money. If you go back to August 2022, Manchester United shares were trading at $10.70. So if you'd bought there, you could have trebled your money
Mm.
by selling a proportion of your shares to Sir Jim in respect of this offer. So yeah, it does seem to be a lot of money for a business which is losing money. Manchester United doesn't make a profit. It's this isn't a football discussion. There's 1,000,001 interviews about football, but I think a casual observer would say, 90 million pounds for Paul Pogba, 80 million pounds for Harry Maguire, 60 million pounds for Angel Di Maria, 35 million pounds for Donny van de Beek. Then you've got Anthony and Casemiro, another 150 million quid. Manchester United they're very good at writing out big checks,
Mm.
but they're not getting much in return
Yeah.
for those big checks. So in theory, that side of the club is going to be addressed. And there's a lot of criticism which is levelled at the Glazers, much of which is warranted. But what isn't warranted is to say that they've not given a continuum of managers a competitive budget. The money's there; it's just been spent poorly.
Yeah, I think it was a recent episode you did on your podcast, Kieran. You mentioned looking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the 22-23 accounts for Man United, and I think you said it was the highest ever Premier League club has ever kind of had in terms of incomings, but they're still losing hundreds of thousands of pounds a week. Is that right?
Yeah. They're losing money. The total cost of the squad exceeds £1 billion. Now the average wage is 140, 150 grand a week. They can recruit practically any player they want, apart from some of the other elite clubs. But they remember that Manchester United outbid Manchester City for Harry Maguire. They outbid Manchester City for Alexis Sanchez from Arsenal. They outbid Manchester City for Cristiano Ronaldo when he became available. So they certainly have the money. And I think the accusation which is levelled at Manchester City that they are buying the Premier League isn't actually warranted, because they're broadly on a par. And what City are very good at, again, I don't want to shift this towards a football discussion, is that they're very good at turning around and saying, no, we will not overpay. Whereas Manchester United are just absolute suckers. Once they've decided they want a player, that's it. They'll just pay a huge premium over the market value.
Yeah. And then I did hear you talk about kind of outstanding transfer fees, which I found quite interesting. Back when Sir Alex Ferguson was there, I don't know what it was, whether they owed any then, but nowadays the transfer fees are kind of paid in instalments, and I think you said they owe over 300 million quid for kind of transfers that have already gotten players that maybe some of them players already gone. I don't know.
Yep. Transfer fees are paid in instalments, so you're effectively using a credit card to acquire talent, and there's nothing wrong with that. People don't necessarily have a spare 50-60 million pounds in the bank account on a set day. So that is the traditional way of acquiring players these days. But what Manchester United have done to a far greater extent than other clubs is that they've bought players on extended credit deals. So when Sir Alex retired, Manchester United owed other clubs £34 million. So that's 2013. Yes, we know that there's been inflation over the course of the last decade, but they now owe other clubs 364 million. So it's gone up by a factor of 11 in a decade. Even football wage inflation has not gone up by that factor, and footballers are well remunerated individuals, especially in the Premier League.